I want to talk more about the reprehensible behaviour we've seen in Melbourne over the past couple of days, and I'm joined now by the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Ryvchin, joining me from Sydney. Thanks for joining us again, Alex. You must have been really perturbed by what you saw in Melbourne, the violence, the hatred, and supposedly a broad demonstration against the defence industry and war, but so heavily targeted against Israel.
Well, these scenes were just so shocking, so deplorable, and so frankly un-Australian. And, you know, the hypocrisy that runs through it all. I mean, these are people who claim to be pacifists, anti-war, anti-violence, but how quickly they turn to violence against journalists, against the police. These are the same people that cheer when the Houthis fire drones at apartment buildings in Tel Aviv, who yearn for Iran to invade Israel. I mean, these people are a sham. And what began with the Jews 11 months ago, these sorts of deplorable, degenerate scenes have spread to wider society, which was inevitable. And looking at those scenes, again, my sympathies are primarily with the police. I mean, one thing that the organisers of these protests have been doing for months and months and months, and the Greens have been aiding them in this regard, is vilifying the police as some sort of, you know, agents of state power and legitimate targets for violence. And these are just ordinary Australians who want to do their job and get home. And seeing the terror etched on their faces in those scenes, it's pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's just terrible. I showed earlier how one of the protesters was chanting the names of Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist groups. We saw countless Palestinian flags there, so the pro-Palestinian protesters used this. They're out there in force. Sky News spoke to one of them.
The reason that there's a big connection is, you know, what's happened in Palestine happened to our First Nation people in this country. So, look, we and myself, we're anti-war everywhere. My heart is connected with Palestine, but that doesn't mean I'm okay with war in other places.
You know, again, this pacifist notion in such a violent protest and this absurd link between Palestinians and Indigenous people, let's put all that to one side. We're used to that. But, Alex, you must be concerned that what we saw in Melbourne is the culmination, and I agree, the police have been really strong over the past couple of days, and they essentially scared off the protesters today with their force. But isn't it the culmination of the weakness we've seen against these repeated protests since October the 8th in Australia last year?
Well, look, you can trace it all the way back to the Opera House steps and the lack of consequences then. And you've seen this trajectory in the months that have ensued, where you've had encampments on university grounds, which should never have been there and were permitted. And in many regards, they were appeased by the university administrations. You've seen this progression in the speech of these activists, from calling for a ceasefire to then calling for greater violence, calling for intifadas to be globalized, more attacks on Israelis. You're seeing brazen support for terrorist organizations. The Hamas Red Triangle is now almost ubiquitous in these gatherings. And again, there are no consequences. And as long as these people are allowed to get away with it, they're going to continue. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah, I fear you're right, and this is where we need stronger political leadership. Just briefly, I noticed that the New South Wales schools curriculum is going to start to introduce Holocaust education for everyone. Now, better late than never, but it's getting rid of some of that ignorance that's underlying these debates and protests will be a welcome step forward.
Well, look, the way that anti-Semitism has thrived through the ages is you've had malicious people, sinister people, exploiting the ignorance of the masses and doing diabolical things. And education is the best way to drive out that ignorance. And this is something that's badly needed. But it can't merely be Holocaust education. It can't position anti-Semitism as something that occurred in Europe in the mid-20th century. We need to also understand anti-Semitism in the here and now as it occurs on our streets.
Yeah, well said. Thanks for joining us again, Alex. I appreciate it. Alex Ryvchin there, who's with the Executive Council of Australian Jewry.